I'm coming at this from a different perspective. I'm not an academic. I actually don't have a PhD. I got a master's degree and started out in industry, but I've been in government for about 26 years now. So I'm coming at this from a state agency perspective. Brief outline of the talk. I'm going to talk about some of the different kinds of jobs you might find yourself working in a state agency, some of the types of writing needed, along with some samples of those writing. And then I actually performed an informal survey of some of my colleagues at other state geological surveys to find out how they would answer two questions about preparing for a writing career in government. So what types of state agencies employ geoscientists? Well, the obvious one would be state geological surveys. And state geological surveys do a wide range of various kinds of science. We do geologic mapping, mineral resource studies, that would be economic geology. Also, groundwater and hydrogeology is becoming increasingly important, especially at state geological surveys. Geologic hazards, earthquakes, sinkholes, landslides, even volcanoes, state geological surveys study them. So there's a wide range of science, but then we also, many state surveys have an editorial staff who will assist their geoscientists in preparing publications. And then we all do outreach. In some states, there are people dedicated to outreach, but here, for example, in Virginia, where we have a very small geological survey, all of our scientists are involved in outreach in some way. But there are other kinds of agencies, state agencies that employ geoscientists. Several friends of mine work for the state highway department as geologists, and they deal with things like roadway stability, landslides, sinkholes, even aggregate testing. What's the most appropriate kind of crushed stone to use in making concrete or asphalt? And then there are a number of regulatory agencies that will hire geologists, agencies that regulate mining, mining for coal, mining for crushed stone, and mining for minerals, such as industrial minerals. Also oil and gas. Some state geologic surveys actually regulate oil and gas in their states. And also, most states have some sort of regulation over groundwater withdrawals and groundwater protection. They employ a lot of geologists and hydrogeologists. Also, the area of solid waste, the permitting of landfills and the study of closed landfills. So yeah, there are different kinds of jobs you could end up working in state government as a geoscientist. Well, what are some of the kinds of writing that are needed when you get into state government? And I'm going to divide this into two parts. First, the more technical side of things, and then I'll talk a little bit about the less technical side of writing. So some of the examples of technical writing as a state government geoscientist would be field notes, published maps. Usually maps have some kind of text that go with them, and that requires writing. Various types of reports, abstracts for journals or meetings, and then grant proposals. In my agency, we are about 50% federally funded, so that means every year we have to apply for federal grants, and so writing grant proposals is a big part of the job of a geoscientist in my agency. And I'll show some examples of these different things. Of course, the taking of field notes is evolving. On the left here, you can see a photo of the way we used to do things. It's actually one of my field notebooks and a paper topographic map. Some scientists still like to take paper field notes. I find that writing in a notebook gives you a lot more richness to your field notes. You can tend to note more details when you're writing in a field notebook than you do here in this middle slide. Here is one of the data loggers that we use. And you see you have actually fairly limited fields into which to enter data. There are some kind of free text fields that I'm not showing here, but still having to type everything on this tiny little keyboard, it's a very concise form of technical writing. And as I said, you tend to not have the detail that you would put in a field notebook. And more and more we're finding that our geoscientists are using their phones to collect, their own phones to collect field data. And there are various applications for this. But again, a lot of the data ends up, it's this kind of rock and it's this kind of observation, and you don't end up with a lot of free text. So it requires to deliver the needed information. You have to be very concise and use exactly the right words. Publication of maps, especially geologic maps, is really the bread and butter of much of what happens at state geological surveys. You can see here a map is usually a large sheet of paper with a bunch of graphical elements, including the map and cross sections, but more than half of that sheet of paper is covered with words. And so a geoscientist had to write these words. And again, this is a particular kind of writing, not even in sentences, but it's an accepted way of describing rocks in a geologic map publication. And then reports. If you go to State Geological Survey's website, and I'll give you a link at the end where you can find all of them, you'll find literally thousands and thousands of reports. I just picked this one. It's a hydrogeology report from northern New Jersey, from the New Jersey Geological Survey. And here's just an example of what I consider well-structured paragraphs, well-structured sentences, although I did notice there is a typo in here, so let's not look too carefully at that. But yeah, so most states, I would say, have an editorial staff that will assist the geoscientists in taking their science from observations to publication. But it helps a lot if the scientists themselves have good writing skills from the start, and you'll hear more about that in just a few minutes. Another example here, the writing of abstracts. And this is where there's a lot of opportunity for writing bad abstracts, and if you go to almost any professional society, you can see a full range of qualities. But this is one that I thought was quite good, and this is from the North Carolina Geological Survey, a geoscientist named Kathleen Farrell, who works in the coastal plain. One of the things that state geological surveys do, a lot of us do present at professional meetings. So this one is from a GSA Southeastern Section meeting. And it's a well-structured abstract. It's got 3 paragraphs, and the paragraphs themselves are well-structured. I think this is a good example of a well-written abstract. And then I mentioned before grant proposals. This is an example from the U.S. Geological Survey's website. They actually selected this proposal as a good example for their NGGDPP, that stands for the National Geological and Geophysical Data Preservation Program. About 30 to 35 states a year participate in this program, where the USGS provides funding to rescue various physical and digital data collections that may be at risk of decay or disposal or loss for other reasons. And so this is just the very first part of this proposal. And I just give this an example of some well-written introductory material to a much longer proposal. This proposal, I think, is 12 pages total. But you can look this up on the USGS website if you want to read what the USGS considers to be a well-written grant proposal. And then we do a lot of non-technical writing in state government. For example, our website content needs to be aimed at the general public. There's a lot of science in there, but it's not written for scientists. As a matter of fact, all of these examples, outreach materials, fact sheets and brochures, social media, and even letters to citizens, you have to be able to convey technical topics in less technical language. So again, it requires concise writing and clearly presented ideas in simple language. So here's a good example of some website content. This describes the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology's earthquake monitoring efforts. It's just 2 paragraphs there describing to the public what the agency is doing in terms of monitoring earthquakes. And again, you can find hundreds and hundreds of examples of web content written by scientists for non-scientists on state geological survey websites. I thought this was a good example. Another example, outreach materials. This one's from California. It was a joint effort between the California Geological Survey and the California Office of Emergency Services, but it's a brochure aimed at the general public, how to survive a tsunami. And they have some other things, how to survive an earthquake. I imagine Washington State has a brochure about protecting yourself from landslide hazards. So you could argue that there's no more important writing that you can possibly do in a state geological survey than something that's going to save people's lives. So something like this, very simply presented as bullets. Actually, this is a two-sided brochure. I'm only presenting one side of it, but these ideas are presented clearly, succinctly. It's a particular style of writing that's particularly well suited to this short format, but it's arguably one of the most important things you can do as a geoscientist is help save people's lives. And then social media is becoming more and more important. This one's from Arizona. They have a particularly good Twitter account where in very, very short sentences, of course, this one links to a YouTube video, but you need to be able to present concepts in just a few words or a few characters. 144 characters. If you can say everything you need to say in 144 characters, then you're ready for the social media world. And then I find in my job, and I hear this from other state geologists as well, that they have to sometimes write letters to citizens. And for some reason, every time a citizen in Virginia writes about the topic of offshore drilling, it comes to me to respond to them. So I write dozens of these letters a year, and I have to explain some things in non-technical terms. But and it's really more of a policy type of document than it is science. But again, you're a person who understands facts about how the world is working, and you have to explain it to someone who doesn't have that information. And we try to keep these letters down to one side of one page. This is just the top half of the page. So those are some examples of non-technical writing that you may have to do when you work for a state agency. And then I mentioned in my outline that I took a survey of some of the other state geological surveys, and I just asked two questions. Does your agency offer any training to its employees in technical writing? And the second question, what advice would you offer to a student in preparing their writing skills for a future job at your agency? So the next 3 or 4 slides here cover the answers I got. So does your agency offer any training to its employees in technical writing? I heard back from 14 different states. Not a single one of them offers any formal training while once they hire someone. New hires are expected to be able to write on the day they start work. Informal training is available in the form of peer review and editor feedback, and we'll be hearing a bit more about that in a minute here. In some states, university classes are available for people who need them, but there is an expectation that when you come in, you should be ready to write. And here are some quotes. I'm not going to read all of these, but the first one says it all. We expect applicants to come in with technical writing skills. We expect our staff to have that skill when they start with us. We expect clear, organized writing from day one. And then Delaware, we just hire them and expect them to know. So it seems universal that, at least in state geological surveys, they want you to be prepared on the day you show up for work to start writing. And then question 2, what advice would you offer a student in preparing their writing skills? Well, and I've listed these by state. Illinois, they say, well, take writing classes even if you think you don't need them. Always good advice. Participate in professional societies that provide student opportunities to submit abstracts and posters. The Geological Society of America, American Geophysical Union, both of those organizations are very happy to accept student abstracts for posters or talks. From the State Geologists of Maine, if you're an undergraduate, if you have a chance to write a senior thesis, write one. It's going to be a good chance for you to get some feedback from some people who have a lot more experience than you do. And then this one from Nebraska, learn a foreign language. German is good because it has a more rigid grammar and it forces one to relearn English grammar. So that's some good advice. Some more advice here on question 2. And we heard Steve say this before, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. There's no better teacher than just writing a lot. The practice of good writing is a lifelong endeavor. You need to embrace that. You're not going to be perfect at the beginning. You'll get better. Pennsylvania suggests read a lot of journal articles. And then my friend from Maine, get something published. Yeah, if you're a student and you can get something published, you are going to go through a baptism by fire. You're going to, in that publication process, you are going to get some critical review from peer reviews and some possibly brutal corrections from editors. It's all a good process for learning and developing a thick skin. And then this whole slide is about embracing criticism. These are quotes from different states. Learn how to take critical reviews. Take the advice you're given. Make it part of your writing. Peer review is one of the best ways to see what makes good writing. Find someone to critique and constructively edit your writing. Be willing to accept and ultimately be unafraid of criticism. So again, we hear this over and over again. One of the best things you can do is write something and then get it criticized by your peers, by an editor, by someone who knows good writing when they see it. And then Leela asked me to kind of compile anything I noted about trends and observations from about students coming into the workforce. And I'm sorry to say that most of the news I got was not very good. From at least 4 states, they said the writing skills of scientists is deteriorating, technical writing ability has declined, many of today's new graduates seem to be deficient, and Nebraska is blaming society as a whole has gone rather soft on communication skills. And you know, we could blame social media, we could blame spell checker, we could blame grammar checker, but I think it's possibly it's organic. I think we just have set the bar rather low when it comes to the expectation that people be able to write well, even among college students. And so what I'd like to say here is we need to put that bar back up. We need to raise the bar back up and really get people interested in writing well and dedicated to writing well. So just a brief review of what I presented. I talked a little bit about geoscience, different kind of jobs you could have in state agencies. I presented some examples of the different kinds of writing produced in state agencies, and then I talked about the informal survey of my peers and what they have to say about preparing yourselves for technical writing. And then just this last slide here, some interesting resources. The U.S. Geological Survey has a publication called Suggestions to Authors, very helpful. Steve mentioned his university's writing lab. I guess most universities have writing labs. Purdue has a particularly good online writing lab with a lot of resources there. The Society for Technical Communication is a professional organization for technical writers, and they have some great resources on their website, and also they have an annual convention where you can go and learn about good writing. The Dutch PhD coach, that sounds, well, the fact is, if you can write a PhD dissertation, you can write a scientific paper. So this woman, the Dutch PhD coach, on her website has a lot of helpful advice on things like getting past writer's block when you're trying to write something. And then at the bottom here, the Association of American State Geologists. If you go to this link, you will be able to find a list of all the different state geological surveys if you want to look at content on their sites or seek jobs on their websites. So that concludes my presentation.